I want to have a conversation, something I mentioned on the show at various points a few times in the recent weeks. But now I want to dig into this and really talk about it in depth. But to do that, I have to go back to something that one of the first articles I wrote, actually, for the Daily Wire was a typically optimistic and cheerful piece titled "The United States of America No Longer Exists." And at the time, it was not met with a very warm reception from a lot of readers. And I kind of understand that because, number one, I had just started at the site. So I think a lot of people, they didn't know who I was. And they thought, who is this guy? Who's this guy coming in here? One of the first things he tells us, the United States doesn't exist. It was a tad bleak, I admit. 3 years later, it brings me no pleasure to say, I told you so. Usually one of my favorite things to say. My wife will tell you. But in this case, not so much. My basic thesis in that piece was that our country, though existing still as a legal and geographic entity, cannot be meaningfully described as united. So the United States of America no longer exists, except in name. We have nothing but the law and the land holding us together. And that is not enough to make a nation, to make a people. There needs to be something else, some uniting principle, some defining commonality that binds us. If we are going to be united, we must be united around something and by something. Today, 3 years later, all of that holds true, only more so. The key difference between now and 3 years ago is that, arguably we no longer even have the law holding us together. Between the unconstitutional lockdowns and the sudden abandonment of those policies in order to allow rampaging mobs to wreak havoc in the streets for weeks on end, the rule of law has broken down. And with our borders still about as porous as they've ever been, it's hard to say that we are meaningfully united even on a geographic level. So with these two pillars crumbling, pillars that were already insufficient in themselves to keep a country together, what's left is the question. Many nations around the world and throughout history have been held together by the bonds of their common heritage, ancestry, language, tradition. These are the kinds of things that for many countries, that's what makes it a country. Now, the United States has always been different in these respects, but we once did have a common language and at least a few cultural traditions that we all had in common. Now, though, it's ethnocentric and xenophobic and racist to expect immigrants who come to this country to learn the language of the country they're immigrating to. As for traditions, our national holidays like Thanksgiving and Columbus Day have been abolished in many quarters, and that trend is rapidly gaining speed. The trend is going in the direction of it happening more, not less. No doubt Memorial Day and Independence Day will be on the chopping block soon enough. These holidays are being torn down along with the statues of our historical icons and politicized like the sporting events that once gave us respite from the political back and forth, and now even those are platforms for the culture war, are political events almost. These losses are not insignificant. To lose holidays, to lose the statues, that is not an insignificant thing. Healthy, vibrant countries have always had their traditions, have always had their holidays, have always had their heroes. We're going to try to be the first country in history without any of that. I don't think the experiment will prove successful. But the thing that has always made America unique, of course, is that it's a nation founded on ideas, on a creed. So you could say that, hey, we can survive, tear down the statues, get rid of the holidays. That's not what makes America America. And I agree, that's not what makes America America. If nothing else, we were once joined by our shared belief in the ideas and the creed that lays at the foundation of our country. We have never succeeded in actually applying all of those lofty principles to everybody equally. That all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with inherent dignity and value. We have never succeeded in actually applying that to everybody. Never. And we don't now. Now we exclude the 1 million babies who are killed every year. So there have always been some really glaring and terrible exceptions that we have made to that, but we shared these ideas on an aspirational level at least. Now we no longer even aspire to be that sort of country. Many Americans fundamentally reject the inherent dignity of human beings. It's not just that they believe in the inherent dignity and they profess it, but they don't apply that principle to babies. That would be bad enough. No, it's that for a lot of people, they just don't believe that that's the case. They don't think people have inherent dignity and worth. So we are no longer at least aspiring to be the sort of country that protects and values all people equally. And our ideas of what it means to be equal are so elementally opposed as to render the term meaningless. Are we joined then by our shared desire to be free? Is that something that we can say, at least, and maybe we don't have anything else, but we're America, we love freedom. We've got that going at least for us. No. In the minds of many people, the ultimate vision of freedom is a socialist utopia where the free market is abolished, the government provides all the basic needs, everything is basically controlled and planned by the government. Now, to me and to many others, this is a vision of slavery. This is not a vision of freedom. So it may be true that all Americans talk about freedom, that we all say we want freedom, but the only commonality between the competing views of freedom is the word itself, nothing else. Can we be bound by our passion for human rights? Again, no. The situation with rights is much like that with freedom. Those on the left, not just on the leftist fringes, but in the mainstream, would say that mothers have a right to kill their offspring. Some Americans have a right to the money and property of other Americans. Biological males have a right to enter a woman's locker room or be on her sports team. Gay couples have a right to the goods and services of Christian business owners, and so on. They see a human right as something always in competition with other rights claims. So for them, rights are a competition, a struggle. One right must always supersede another right. So we've got this concept of superseding rights. The woman's right to autonomy trounces violently a child's right to life. A college student's right to be free of debt overpowers a wealthy man's right to the fruit of his own labor, and so on. Now, I would say that what they're really describing is one group's struggle for power and dominance over another. This has nothing to do with rights. Rights are inherent to our human nature. By definition, human rights, real human rights, cannot be in competition with one another. If you find yourself weighing these claims to superseding rights and trying to figure out whose right comes before, whose right comes before the other, if you find yourself doing that, it means that your whole concept of rights, human rights, is flawed. That's the way that I would see it. And since we have fundamentally opposing definitions of the term human rights, we cannot be united around it. If we cannot be united around tradition, around language, around heritage, and we also cannot be united around a shared belief in freedom and human rights, then what's left? We would appear already to be two different countries, or perhaps several different countries. And even that is generous, because really, when I talk to somebody and he tells me that he believes babies aren't people, that it's okay for a mother to kill her child, which he calls a fetus. Biological sex doesn't exist. Men can get pregnant. Police departments should be abolished. America is racist to its core. I'm a white supremacist if I disagree with any of these points. When I'm told this, I find myself questioning whether we're even from the same planet, let alone from the same universe, let alone the same country. This is how absolutely opposed we are on all levels, with almost no common ground. no shared frame of reference. And that's why, if you're wondering why our arguments and debates are so unproductive, they never go anywhere, it's because we have no way to argue these points. We have no way to communicate. In order to communicate and debate someone, you have to have some frame of reference that you share between you two. Yeah, there has to be something there. I mean, there has to be some common value you both have, and that's going to be your starting point. You're going to build from that when you're having your debate. But if you don't even have that, there's just nothing that can happen here. It's not going to go anywhere. And that's where we are in our country, where we've got people, there's just nothing there at all that they share. And it is not an exaggeration to say that in this way, we are far more divided now than we were during the Civil War. I mean, you read about the Civil War, and obviously we can't romanticize or idealize the Civil War. 600,000 people died. It was a brutal, violent, horrible, horrific, nightmarish time. So there's no doubt about that. But even then, fundamentally, the two sides were not nearly as opposed, sort of philosophically as we are now, because they at least had, they had some common ideas, like common ideas like dignity and manliness and honor. They had that between them at least. They even both valued freedom. It's just that they had very different ideas of what freedom meant. But they did, and which is the case now, you could say. But they did believe that you had human rights endowed by the Creator, inherent human dignity. They believed in that. They didn't apply it equally. They didn't apply it all the way. There are obviously some huge blind spots there, just like we have now. But on an aspirational level, they had that. There was something there. There was a morsel of something, which is why the Civil War ended. Reconstruction was a terrible time as well in many ways, but the country did survive somehow. 600,000 people die. Brutal, violent. It was the worst war we've ever seen, still to this point in America, anyway. The deadliest war. It survived. And America went on to become a powerhouse. How did that happen? I think one of the ways it happens is that there was at least some commonality, some shared uniting principles that they had, as opposed as they were on so many other things. We don't have that now. What does that mean? Well, I guess this is the part where I'm supposed to have a solution. I'm supposed to give you the 1, 2, 3 step plan of how we can solve all these problems and come together. I don't have it. That's sort of my point. I just think that we need to begin by confronting and acknowledging the situation we are actually in as a country. And we need to be realistic. And so if you're sitting there calling for unity and saying we need to put our differences aside, it's not going to happen. It can't happen. In order for that to happen, millions of Americans on one side or the other are going to have to radically change how they see reality. And that's not going to happen overnight or at all, potentially. So we just need to start thinking about what we can actually do in light of all of this. The only problem people talk about breaking apart as a country and, forming two different countries. I think there's a lot to be said for that, actually. Listen, no country lasts forever. No country does. They all come to an end. We have to confront that reality too. The only problem is, though, that our division is not as geographically defined as it was during, say, the Civil War. So I don't know how that would work, but I think we need to start thinking along the lines of what can we do in light of the fact that there are these unbridgeable gaps separating one group of Americans from others. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.